There's a poem shared in our daily devotional this past Friday that it just felt like we had to read it this morning. It's a poem written by trans poet J. Home. Blessed are the outcasts. Blessed are the outcasts, the ostracized, the outsiders. Blessed are the scared, the scarred, the silent. Blessed are the broken, for they are not broken. Blessed are the hated, for they are not worthy of hate. Blessed are those who try, those who transform, who transition. Blessed are the closeted. God sees you shine anyway. Blessed are the queers who love creation enough to live the truth of it despite a world that tells them they cannot. And blessed are those who believe themselves unworthy of blessing. What inconceivable wonders you hold. We live in this tension. What the world tells us is happiness, and where we're actually invited to find it.
So we are in this sermon series called Into the Mess, where we're looking at the messy life, which happens to be our lives and our world. And so we're thinking about, like, what does it mean to follow Jesus into the real world that is so... Anyway, there are a lot of words that you could use. And so today, we're entering into some of the teaching of Jesus around this crazy idea that the last are first, and that kind of inverting the system, and that the poor in spirit are blessed, and this whole new way of seeing the world. And we thought it would be helpful to think a little bit about Martin Luther King Jr. Day tomorrow as a way to think about then and now. There's also an inauguration tomorrow. I don't know if you heard that going on in the news. But just to be thinking about how do we see the world? What's it really like? What is this mess that we're entering into? And so I thought we would start, and then for our friends on Zoom, feel free to add things in the chat. But
because I'm with you and I'm going to read it.
Yes, so Brenna's got the chat. But how would you say, thinking about the status quo back in the day of MLK, so think about the 50s and 60s primarily, and think about today and the status quo today in our different areas in our culture. And what would you say, what's similar, what's different? What are some of the standouts back then? Like, ooh, this was a huge issue. And how does that compare to today? So we're just going to take like short phrases. This is not our chance to do a teaching, but I just want to hear from some folks. What was going on back in the day of MLK? We'll start with that. What was going on? What were some of the issues? Yeah. Women's rights. Is that what you said? Yeah. So women's rights were a thing, right? And MLK, one of the things that MLK worked on was with the civil rights bill that got passed, right? Mm-hmm. It addressed not discriminating based on gender, right? Because that was a big, big deal. Yeah. Other things that were going on back in MLK's day.
I have a Zoom contribution. Wendy Cantrell says segregation.
There was segregation?
Yeah. Huh. Yep.
Huh. Who knew?
Civil rights.
Civil rights. Well, so let's think about those two. Where are we at with women's rights today, and how are we feeling about segregation today? Just a couple of thoughts, or just
Let's start with the one, women's rights.
We'll start with that? We'll start with women's rights.
One at a time.
One at a time. Going backwards is how at least Barbara feels. Thank you, Barbara. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts about women's rights these days? There might be some feelings too, and you can share feelings. Yeah, Nichelle.
Fear.
There's some fear, right? There's some fear. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How is this still a thing?
How is this still a thing?
Yeah.
Still. Yeah. Okay, segregation. I mean, we kind of nailed that one down. Segregation. How are we at with segregation these days? Yeah, Zoe.
People are still being killed because of the color of their skin.
People are still being killed because of the color of their skin, right? So I looked it up this morning. It's if you're black versus if you're white, it's 3 times more likely if you're black that you'll be killed because of the color of your skin, particularly by the police. Yeah. Yeah, Richard.
People still being profiled by the color.
There's a lot of profiling still.
Yeah.
And we see that in some very interesting places. Yeah. Yeah, Charles.
We are still being marginalized and assumed not to have the tools that white men do as far as abilities, DEI hires, et cetera.
Right. So the DEI hires, and we're assumed not to have quality because you're a black man, and you're assumed that obviously you're not as qualified, says the judge. Literally. Amazing. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And right. So civil rights bill actually does get passed, and there are some differences between here and 60 years ago, and then there are not some differences. In some ways, things are going backwards. And-
Access to voting.
What's that?
Access to voting.
Access to voting, right? So voting rights is that huge bill, 1965, right, that MLK got pushed through, thank God. And how have we done since then? A lot of progress,
There's been some maneuvering, I've heard. Yeah.
right? I just think, Zoe, were you going to say something else?
I was going to say access to housing is still an issue.
Yeah.
Access to housing is still an issue,
Yeah.
right? Where redlining is technically not on the books as it was legally enforced,
Yeah.
but still in it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking one of the storylines with the recent fires and Altadena in particular, right? To say, like, here's one of these neighborhoods, these communities where black families have built up some generational wealth they could
Yeah.
pass on. But now the fires.
Now it's fires, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else from MLK's day that you think about? Some of the stuff that he talked about, and yeah, Ali.
Enabling and supporting apartheid.
Enabling and supporting apartheid. Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing that we stopped that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And apartheid in South Africa, all right, that's something that MLK specifically spoke out against, right? And yet today, there can feel like, boy, there's still an apartheid in one of our allies, in one of the U.S. allies in Israel, right? Where even the UN is saying this is a genocide. Right.
Poverty and income inequality.
Poverty and income equality. Think of all the stuff that MLK, particularly, I don't know particularly, but it got more publicized later in his life, right? That these are the things that he would speak about and say, hey, this is a problem. And so net worth today, in 20, I think the last stat was like, I don't know, I forget, 2022 or something like that. So if you're an African American versus a Anglo-American, right, the numbers are remarkable. It's 10 times. The average net worth is 170,000 versus 17,000. It's 10 times different, right? So, and that's based on housing and redlining, right? It's connected to violence and educate, all kinds of issues connected to that. And there are other issues in terms of other ethnic groups and people groups as well, but those are some of the most blatant numbers, right? And that was what he was addressing then, and still it's an issue today.
And then there's just violence in general, right? Violence and war. And he was committed not just to peacemaking in his civil rights work, but to peacemaking on a global scale.
Yeah. Yeah, you think about how many billions of dollars our country spends in military and shipping military and weapons to other parts of the world. And in some ways, things have changed, and in some ways, things haven't changed. But this is the mess that we're entering into. And we're going to, what do we do with this? How do we follow Jesus here? in this messy world where there has been some shifts, but others not. And it's heavy. It's heavy. And I think a lot of us maybe feel that with the inauguration coming tomorrow. I think a lot of us feel a certain heaviness. And so we're going to try to wrestle with that in the scripture passage today. Our friend Danny is going to read for us. If you'd welcome up Danny Campbell.
He's over there. Do you want this
Choose
one?
that one, yeah. And this is Jesus' opening lines from his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. And we typically stand around City Church as the scriptures read for us. Thanks.
Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks so much, Danny. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Danny. You know, when we hear these words read, I think especially in the context of both Dr. King and then also of tomorrow's inauguration, there can be a real sense of cognitive dissonance, right? And maybe even different pieces of our brain kind of wrestling back and forth with each other. Because on the one hand, part of it says, yes, we honor Dr. King in so many ways because while not a perfect man, no one is perfect, there was so much of what he embodied and he taught that seems to resonate with this, right? To say like, yes, we can, there is a different way of doing things. And part of us wants to believe that. And yet so often, when we look around and see who seems to be getting blessed, it's not those people, right? Like for all Martin Luther King Jr.'s popularity today, he was not so popular while he was actually alive, right? Like he experienced so much persecution, so much pushback that of course resulted in his death. So there is a temptation when we read a passage like this to say, I just don't see it, right? Because when we say, well, I have been so blessed, it's not usually when our house is just burned down, right? I have been so blessed. My rights are being stripped away. They are so blessed. Look how they struggle. That's not usually what we mean when we say that word, right? So it's hard not to see the people who are up on the big stage, who are being given the accolades and the power and the launch codes, and not to see them as like, are they being blessed? Are they the blessed ones? Is it really what Danny just read for us? Is it blessed are the poor in spirit? Or is it blessed are the proud in spirit? Blessed are those who mourn? Or blessed are the shiny, happy people? Blessed are the meek? Or blessed are the billionaires and the billionaire wannabes? And yet I think this week, I don't know if any of you saw this meme going around, particularly I think people thinking about all these billionaires who are involving themselves in the political process these days in ways that don't seem particularly kind or generous, don't seem to exude, just the human spirit. Imagine being a billionaire and not being happy. Imagine being a billionaire and still not being happy, still not feeling like you have enough to think about other people and to want to lift other people up and to be generous and to take some time and, really kind of focus on the bigger things in life. Imagine being a billionaire and not being happy. what if being blessed means something different? What if Jesus is actually inviting us to see the world differently? There's a poem shared in our daily devotional this past Friday that it just felt like we had to read it this morning. It's a poem written by trans poet J. Home. Blessed are the outcasts. Blessed are the outcasts, the ostracized, the outsiders. Blessed are the scared, the scarred, the silent. Blessed are the broken, for they are not broken. Blessed are the hated, for they are not worthy of hate. Blessed are those who try, those who transform, who transition. Blessed are the closeted. God sees you shine anyway. Blessed are the queers who love creation enough to live the truth of it despite a world that tells them they cannot. And blessed are those who believe themselves unworthy of blessing. What inconceivable wonders you hold. We live in this tension. What the world tells us is happiness, and where we're actually invited to find it. So here is the second temptation when we listen to this passage, and it's a little more subtle. You have to look for it a little bit more, because the first temptation has taught us that it's all about what we do and what we achieve, right? How many checks have you gotten checked off your to-do list for your day, for your life? What have you accomplished? And so maybe we accept, okay, there's more to happiness than the world has told me. What's my new checklist? What are the new things I got to do so that God will love me, right? So that I can truly be happy. We want to white knuckle ourselves into these Beatitudes, show how we deserve to be this kind of blessed. Debbie Thomas, whose book Into the Mess has inspired this series for us, writes, "It is emphatically not the case that if I try very hard to be poorer, sadder, meeker, hungrier, thirstier, purer, more peaceable, and more persecuted than I am right now, God will like, love, reward, and appreciate me more than God already does." We don't actually have to be more of these things. I would say the problem most of the time is that we don't admit what we already are. We don't know that it's safe. We don't believe that it's safe enough to say, yes, deep inside of me, there is already hunger. There is already thirst. There is already woundedness and a desire for peace and something in me that just wants to be small and still and humble with my God and with my fellow humans. Think about those billionaires. Don't you think there is something inside of them that is so small and scared? I mean, it's so small and scared that they have to do all this big stuff and amass all of these kind of weapons, right? These tools to intimidate.
Armor.
The armor, yeah. Armor themselves. What if we don't need the armor? What if we just need to be able to strip it down and say, actually, God, here I am. Here I am poor. Here I am mourning. Here I am meek. Would you love me like this?
I know it's sort of strange, but since I'm up here preaching, but I'm taking notes. Like, I love that so much. We don't admit what we already are. You know, it's like, it's just so scary.
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather prove myself to be poor in spirit than admit.
Right? Look at this small, scared part inside me.
Yes, there are a lot of scared small parts inside of me, right? Like, it's just so. And this is the invitation of Jesus for us to admit that. Okay, this is where I really am. And to let Jesus gently, kindly look at you, speak to you, remind you you are loved. It's I find some tension in these verses because Yeah, I was telling Brian the other, no, I don't know if it was you or it was Katie. I was
One of those people.
one of those people that I talk to a lot about theology. It's like, I feel like I preach the same sermon every week, which is like, you're loved. Like, it's okay. You know, you're not, terrible. And this passage, it's sometimes we use it against ourselves to say, well, I have to be unworthy in order to fit. It's like, no, it's just admitting what's already there, where you do feel that. Because the deepest truth is that you are the beloved. Mm-hmm. But sometimes even that can be so unnerving. Like, to really embrace that you are loved, you don't have to fight for it. And then that's actually what gives you the freedom to say, yes, and I'm still really kind of lonely. Or I'm still really insecure, or I'm really angry, or I just can't forgive. Theoretically, that baseline is what helps us get to that space. And it's this whole, like, it turns everything on its head. Everything in our culture for the last 60 years, since the days when Dr. King was in our midst, teaching and leading, that we struggle with. I want to read again from Debbie Thomas. And, she's an immigrant, and so she comes into this culture from Southeast Asia, and she's got eyes to see things, I think, in part because, sure, she grew up here, but you still, the outside insider, it gives you some insights. And so this is what she writes about this whole idea of Jesus' new way. She writes, what Jesus bears witness to in the Beatitudes is God's unwavering proximity to pain, suffering, sorrow, and loss. God is nearest to those who are lowly, oppressed, unwanted, broken. God is not obsessed with the shiny and the impressive. God is too busy sticking close to what's messy, chaotic, unruly, and unattractive. The Catholic theologians historically would talk about God's preferential treatment of the poor. God actually loves everyone and prefers those who are poor, who struggle. It's this crazy making way that it doesn't fit with how we think of our world. And I was thinking some about it this morning, and so much of it comes to this invitation to rely on someone besides yourself, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Like, they actually need others. They actually need God. And there's a sense in which Jesus is saying that's the space where, because you are beloved, you can ask for help. You can admit need, that you need God, you need other people. And in some ways, if you remember Jesus' two biggest teachings, love God, love others. And in some ways, those are in large part fulfilled when we admit we need God and we need others. That's such a big part of love, is acknowledging I actually do need you. I want you. I want to be connected to you. And I was just thinking, I wouldn't say that, this is probably a shock to everyone, that I excel at being poor in spirit.
Really?
I know. Especially to my close friends. I would think that you would immediately have assumed that. But I was thinking a little bit about this idea, and I was thinking about, there so many times it's our life circumstances that push us ideally to admit our need. Otherwise, sometimes we armor ourselves up to protect ourselves from our need. And I was thinking sometimes it's when we're single and we want to be partnered. And sometimes it's when we're partnered and we realize that's really hard. Sometimes it's because we want to have kids, and sometimes it's because we have kids, right? I mean, it's like you can't win, in case you were wondering. Like, oh, and now this is the perfect situation where all will be well, right? And so I was thinking a little bit about these phases of my life, and I was thinking about parenting in particular. We've got 2 kids who are adults now. And there were so many different phases when I would just experience a sense of like, I have no idea what to do. What do I do with you?
Am I the adult in the room?
What's that?
Am I the adult in the room?
Yeah, am I supposed to like be the one who's not exhibiting a tantrum right now because it's not working? One of my children is present. I'm sure he thinks that I was perfect. But one of the things we did find ourselves doing, and I just think it was actually really helpful, is when different phases of life would come along. This is particularly after they started speaking, which was very helpful for me. I have a lot of words, and it was helpful that they had words too. But is we would ask the kids, like, hey, in this new situation, we've never parented kids in middle school before, right? Are there things you think you might need from us in this season? Hey, we've never parented kids who are applying to college before. Like, how could we be helpful? We've never parented someone who's dating before, right? And that question, we still find ourselves asking it. Like, we actually don't know how to do this. Do you have any coaching for us? It's actually been a really helpful sort of practice. Because the truth is we don't know what we're doing. And we like to pretend we know what we're doing. But anyone who looks closely, or particularly if you live with us, they don't know what they're doing. And so it's better just to sort of put that out there, admit it, and ask for some input because we actually do need it. And so we now have a rhythm every Christmas Eve, or every New Year's Eve, where we ask the question, how have you changed in the last year that you would like for us to acknowledge and accept? In part because we've realized, like, I think you're my kid, and I know you, and I love you, but I think you might be different than you were. And I don't know how to do the new you. And this Christmas Eve, we had a stunning conversation. Stunning. I was like, wow, there's some stuff here I had no idea about. And I think in some ways that's one of the few places in my life where I succeed at admitting I'm poor in spirit. Like, I don't know what to do with this. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a picture for all of us, right? Mm-hmm. To instead of putting up the armor, to let it down and say, I don't know.
Yeah, I had one just kind of like a closing word picture for us that to me just illustrated that so much. And I think it's why in talking about the Beatitudes, what we really end up talking about is relationships, right? It's about community. It's about what kind of world are we building together? So it's the original Inside Out. Most people seen that movie, kind of aware of it, right? The 5 primary emotions that we have go on a journey. We get to go on the journey of the emotions of a kid named Riley. And all throughout the story in the original movie, 2 of the characters, Joy and Sadness, are having some tension, primarily because of Joy. Because Joy, while wonderful, in many, many ways, is very uncomfortable with sadness, right? Really does not want sadness to have much of a say in anything that's going on. And yet Riley's navigating some hard things, a move and yada, yada, right? And it's only at the end of the movie that Joy has this realization. that when sadness is allowed her place, sadness gets her moment. And Riley begins not just to be angry and to lash out and to run away, but with her parents, with people who love her, is able to just cry and say how sad she is, that's when arms wrap around her, right? That's when connection happens. And so Joy is able to realize that this is sadness's gift. That without letting sadness have her moment, community can't happen. Love can't happen. The people who want to care for Riley don't know what's going on. And they can't come and bring comfort and bring healing. And I just think that's the picture here. When we admit who we are, when we let sadness have its moment, when we let need have its moment, when we let, I don't know, I'm not the expert, curiosity, humility have its moment, that's where God can meet us. That's where our friends meet us. That's where we find we're actually able to build authentic connections. And I just feel like it leads us to that place where it's not so much about we have set the direction and the course, and look, we're going to fix the world. But somehow we're just building something new. And that was what Jesus was inviting us into, a world where we're not afraid to be meek. We're not afraid to be sad. We're not afraid to be thirsty and hungry. We get to do those things together and come together and love each other well.
You said something earlier this morning
Did I?
about that I thought was helpful. Can I say it?
Yeah,
And then,
yeah.
then I'll sound smart?
Yeah, take my line, whatever it was.
No, but you were just saying that I think a lot of folks tomorrow may be experiencing some sadness, right? Or some anger, and anger and sadness are often connected. And what does it look like to maybe allow the sadness to pull you towards people and support, and the anger to fuel helpful movement?
Connections.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So if you want to,
No,
but now I
yeah.
sound smart, which is good.
Yeah. I think just being aware, especially realizing that for some of us, it's a lot easier to access our anger than our sadness. So it can be a little breadcrumb, like a little trail through your emotions to follow back, to allow yourself to access the tender and vulnerable parts too. I'm so angry, and that's valuable. I'm a fan of anger, healthy anger. But also it's good to follow the trail and say, and what is underneath my anger as well? Yeah. I think we wanted to invite our friend and leader, Charles Clay, up to pray for us all as we process these things. Okay. Thank you, Charles.
And so, God, we thank you for loving us, each and every one of us, where we are, because of who we are, in spite of who we are, and just because we're yours. We ask that you would be with us in this coming week. There's a lot going on in our communities. First, that you would be with our church community, that you would help us to be an inspiration and a vehicle to help our immediate community, and that can be something that inspires others to continue helping in the greater community. We have a tough week coming up, weather-wise, and fires, and so many people displaced. And we ask that you would be with each of those communities, Altadena, Pacific Palisades, as they come to terms with the very new reality of what their lives, what their communities will be. For those fighting the fires, for those keeping everyone safe, keeping them fed, for those people who are so inspired and motivated to offer whatever they can to help people get their lives back to clothe them, to feed them, to house them. That you would help continue the peace process in Gaza, that we can get all of the hostages returned safely and keep the war from escalating and causing a senseless further loss of life. That you would be with each of us tomorrow in 24 hours when we go back. That you would inspire all of us to use the feelings that we have, to feel those feelings and to channel them into something positive so that we don't lose the many, many gains that we've made over the years. We ask that you would be with us through all of this, Father. In your Son's name, amen.